everyone. Thanks again for tuning in, whether you're on podcast or watching on YouTube. Today, I have another guest from Minnesota. We have Rick Rude. Rick, how you doing?
All's well here, Bryce. How are you doing?
I'm awesome, man. It's Friday, even though this might not go on at a Friday. It is Friday, so that's probably why we're smiling so big. What's new in Minnesota, man? You're just telling you've been busy lately.
Well, with it being the 19th of November, we have no snow on the ground, and we're quite pleased with that. Any day like this is one less day of winter, so we're doing well. However, we're getting a little closer to the good ice fishing season, and so all is well here. The professional teams are not doing well, which is normal. So we're there. Wrestling's kicking off, and all of us that really mean anything to the world I live in are all coming into our own right now, Bryce.
So two things. One, fishing. So what are you catching through the ice mostly? What are people?
Everybody goes after walleye here. Pike is
the
fish, but I understand that the Erie walleye fishing is pretty good. I may have to slip down there, Bryce.
Last year it was insane because it was great because, well, it wasn't great. It was COVID. But I think we went on 3 charters and you just get your limit every time. You're out there for a couple hours. I mean,
the size is nice.
Oh, yeah. I got a kid on our high school team. His dad goes out, and the other junior high coach with me, he's out as much as he can too, just ripping lips, as they call it, you know?
Yeah. I came down to Ohio, and I was going to actually take a look at that. I went out on Lake Erie, but unfortunately I got into a charter in Sandusky that took me out to Putin Bay, and well, I didn't do any fishing.
On the back. Yeah. But there is good fishing on the back end there if you can get that. I know what you're saying there.
I found some round bar and I never left.
Oh, the round bar. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That good music there too. We can talk. So, and sports teams, you're talking about the Vikings, right? Is that what you're talking about?
I am, yes.
Okay. Because I think that's a Vikings player in your background there.
Well, that's Alan Page. That is my hero in life right there behind me.
Okay. Well, I just want to commiserate with you because I'm a Browns fan, and going into this season, if you would have told us with that lineup we are going to be as horrible as we are, I would have took that bet.
You beat us, Bryce. You beat us.
Yeah, blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. So it's rules season. Let's start at the very beginning. Let's hear your wrestling story. That's what this is all about. How did you get involved first in wrestling?
Well, I think it's an interesting story, but it's kind of one of self-interest and survival that got me into wrestling. I have 2 older brothers, and they were both in wrestling, and I grew up on a farm, and Dad was a hard worker. He grew up on family farm and spent 4 years in the military and came back to the farm. That was his life. And he said, well, with your 2 older brothers wrestling, I'm going to need some help milking the cows. So it'd be kind of fun, you and I milking cows. And I'm thinking, wow, Dad, that's a blast. And soon after that, I went out for wrestling. So Dad milked the cows by himself, right?
So that was your get out of milking cows card right there.
Yeah, and thank God my brothers went out for wrestling and not basketball, because I probably would have followed their footsteps. I wouldn't have lasted long, but that's how I got into wrestling, and I just loved it. I had some fantastic coaches, and in a little bitty town of Stewartville, Minnesota is where I started wrestling. And we had a huge following, a big wrestling team. There were A, B, and C squads, and it was just fun, very competitive, and I really enjoyed it. And I remember it was so troublesome for me to lose a match because it just stuck. What did you do wrong? And really it turned out to be a very good cerebral process that I went through, that I put myself through. And I just beat myself up after every loss. And what happened? What did he do that you couldn't counter? Or what did you not do that you should have done to score more points? And I broke that match down into little bitty pieces, Bryce, every little bitty thing. And I put it all back together and said, that's it. I could not get out of his ride. I have to work on that. And I would work on it. I'd figure it out. And no one would beat me with that move again. And And Bryce is kind of strange because that just became my life. Everything got broken into little pieces, find the piece that's flawed and put it all back together again. I ultimately left the farm and went to college, got a computer science degree, and everything, as you know, in computer science is all pieces, elements, little bitty pieces. And I worked, at IBM as an artificial intelligence programmer. Wrestling is still huge in my background. That's my go-to safe spot when work is done, or even when it's not. And later on in life, I left the computer science piece and went into law. And same thing. Everything is an element, and you prove the elements. And once you prove the elements, you have a case. And I related all back to wrestling, and everything started with wrestling. And I say this to my young officials that are coming up: if you just simply understand the rules, break them into the pieces, put yourself in position so that you know what you're looking for, and it's either there or it's not. And once all of those elements line up, you have a rule. You have satisfied a rule. You make a call. And following that, with the mind that I have has been very beneficial. And it helps me break down the new rules. It helps me ask the question, why are we doing it this way? And, some great people around the nation and the National Federation of High School Sports, specifically the wrestling side, are incredibly helpful. There's a man right there in, Ohio, Mr. Vreeland, is just so fantastic to work with. His explanations on things sometimes have to be told once or twice to really get them through, but they're good. And that's how I got into wrestling. I know it's a long way around. It just made such a huge difference in my life, from getting out of milking the cows with Dad to into computer science to into law to really developing young officials and developing officials around the state of Minnesota and elsewhere. I've told this story at the Iowa Wrestling Coaches and Officials annual meeting. I got an opportunity to speak to them, and it's the same thing. Some people laugh and some scratch your head like, how in the hell do you do this? This doesn't make a lot of sense. I got a chance to speak down at Punahou, Hawaii. It was an organization getting together down there, Hawaiian wrestling officials, and they brought in some people from Oregon, and we went through a lot of the different details of officiating, how we do things in Minnesota, and I told the story of the elements, and it's been very good for me. So sorry for the long answer on that, Bryce, but that's how I started. That's how I got into this, and this is what I really look at. When it's difficult, you've got to break it into pieces. You've got to break it down and find the area that's flawed. Fix that, put it all back together again, and you'll have a successful element.
Yeah, well, other than, finding the flaw and putting the pieces back together, anytime you have a big problem, right? It's how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So break it down, and then obviously you're taking it to a different level. But that's different. That's a different wrestling story than I've had yet. You mentioned Ohio and Jim Freeland. He has ties to my school where I graduated from and where I coach. And actually, my shirt, Panther Amateur Wrestling Club. Let's see. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was. His kids went through some of that there. But yeah, he coached right before my dad was in high school. So I know Mr. Freeland really well. The first time I became an official, he was who trained me.
Okay.
Back in 2001. So that's cool. So how did you go from computer science to wanting to go to law school?
Well, it was something I always wanted to do. Bryce, I'd have these recurring dreams of what would life be like. I'm 70 some years old, and I'm sitting on a porch bench, and I'd ask the question, what would life have been like had you followed your dream and went to law school? And that just kept coming back and bothering me. And I had a really great position at IBM. I was in advanced technologies, and the new AS400 was coming out. This is like 100 years ago. And I was touring the world just speaking to software developers and how to put these advanced technologies into their applications and how to make money and how to move these computers for IBM. And it was going fantastic. And, the AS400 turned out to be the highest selling computer in the world next to IBM by itself, relational database. It was just an incredible computer. And once that kind of moved on, Bryce, I got bored, and there is nothing in this world that is more unsafe. I say bored, Rick Rude. And I just kind of kept going back in my thoughts. And well, now might be a really good time to go to law school. So I was 40 years old, and I enrolled at Hamlin Law School in St. Paul. And I was still working at IBM, and got through my first 2 years, and then thought, well, I should probably leave IBM. And so I took a buyout, and never wanted to practice, just wanted to know law. So I did a few things with a firm and quickly left that and went out to renewable energy.
Okay.
Worked with a large company, Cargill, in their ag department. We worked on ag waste to energy. So I was helping develop an anaerobic digester that would
biodigesters.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, those are awesome.
I was working with some of the largest dairy farms. Everything is cyclical, Bryce. You always go back to where you started. I was out of law school, and I was back on a dairy farm in Idaho Falls, Idaho, working on the Betancourt Dairy Farm, and it was the 7 largest dairy farms in the world, and they were beautiful. The cows were so clean, and it just took such great care. But we worked on bringing their waste into an anaerobic digester that was built by a Dvorak Engineering in Wisconsin, and we spun this around, and we made enough electricity to run the farm and then also to sell out onto the network. And all of a sudden, they're not top dressing their corn, their fields with cow manure, and corn was growing about 3 feet high at the time. And we fixed all of that, took the odor out of the air. Problem is, we just weren't making a whole lot of money, but it was an experimental thing, and it was beautiful. It worked great. And ultimately, we sold it off to a German company, and then I found another niche on industrial waste, and a lot of it was going to a landfill. Landfills are bad, not good.
That should not be a question.
Yes, it's not good. So my company, Minnesota Environmental Solutions, works on keeping industrial solid waste out of landfills. We incinerate it at incineration at waste to energy facilities around the Midwest, and that's my main focus. So wrestling and all of the stuff that I've done in my life has always been there since about 3rd grade, when Dad wanted me to milk cows. It's always been there. So whatever I ever did, whatever was difficult, whatever was going wrong, I always had that safe spot to go back to. That safe spot was wrestling, and that was where I belonged. Yeah, and it gave me the drive to get energized again and get back into the world that I lived in. And when that world was taking a pause, I would run back and do my officiating. I remember speaking at it was a Minnesota Athletic Directors Conference, and I was at IBM, and this thing was coming that we're speaking on it right now, the internet. At that time, it was called the Information Superhighway, and it wasn't out. It didn't exist. And I was speaking to this group, and my former high school coach, Daryl Jagger, was the activities director for my old school, Stewartville High School. And I explained that you can type onto a computer your schedule for wrestling. You can send it to me, and I'll read it, and I'll put the officials down. I'll sign those officials, and I'll send it back to you. And I'll never forget this, Bryce. Here's this old guy, and he goes, "Now let me get this straight. What you're telling me is I go into that room and I put some stuff into that, I guess that's that computer thing, and then you're going to read it, and then you're going to send it back to me, and I'm going to read it." Well, that just doesn't make any sense. And a little while later, I'm in London at a meeting, and Daryl calls my office and said, "I need an official for Thursday night." And this was like Monday. And so my pager goes off. My phone had left a message in Rochester, Minnesota, notified me. I called back into my phone. It's Daryl, and I couldn't resist. I called Daryl from London, explained this whole thing, and he goes, "Okay, so you're going to be our official, and you're going to be there Thursday night. But let me get this straight. What you're telling me is I called your office in Rochester, and you got the call in London, and now you're assigning me a wrestling official from London? Well, that just doesn't make any sense." And look where we are now.
Yeah, you have to live through it to believe it. Actually, it's funny. Earlier today, I was just thinking about my job and like how we would even do half of the stuff we do without the internet, and it's just nuts.
Yeah, it's brought us the best and the worst things in the world right now in the world we live in.
That's very true. So we talked about, wrestling. It got you out of milking cows. That was the first positive of it. It helped you with all your careers and everything. What got you into becoming an official then?
Well, we moved farms. Back to the cows again. We moved farms. Dad upgraded, bought a bigger farm, and I moved from Stewartville, Minnesota to Hayfield, Minnesota, the Hayfield Vikings, and had a really great, fun career there, and went on to wrestle at River Falls, and I got hurt, broke my collarbone a couple times. Never had a college career, never did anything. Came back, to the farm one weekend, and my high school coach came out and gave me a rule book and said, "You should study this. You should be an official. I don't think you're going to make it as a teacher. I don't think that's going to be in your cards."
Oh, God.
Which means coaching's probably not there, but you should be an official. We need officials. And I was helping Dad out on the weekend, driving the tractor and the corn wagon, and I was reading the rule book, and I thought, wow, that's exactly what I'm going to do. This really will keep me involved. And so I went in and took my test, passed, joined an association in Rochester, Minnesota. The Wrestling Officials, that's what it's called. It's a great naming convention there.
It's like the Dave Matthews Band. They just got really, they're like, screw it.
There's a whole nother line of stories there. But so I started officiating, and I really became very good, very young, and I had some good mentors around me. And every time a difficult situation came up, I just was able to learn from it with these guys, and again, break it into pieces. And what did I do wrong? And how can I learn from this? And I developed the concept of the toolbox. And as an official, you have a toolbox. We all have a toolbox, and we watch officials, we study officials, we watch wrestlers, we watch coaches. And Bryce, wrestling is cyclical. The better the coaching, the better the wrestling. The better the wrestling, the better the officiating. The better the officiating, the better the coaching. It's a cycle, and we're all in this thing together. And I learned fast, and I became pretty good, pretty young, but I could never get a section tournament. I could never break into the pre-state tournament, the section in Minnesota, because these guys ahead of me were so darn good. So, and my numbers were pretty high. My coaches' ratings were pretty high, but again, I could never get a section. And strangely enough, Bryce, I got hired to the state tournament in Minnesota for my first session, and I had never worked a section, and got a chance to meet another crew of just great officials at the state tournament level, and we were blessed. Minnesota had some very, very good high school officials, and others that weren't. But again, in the toolbox concept, I would see the things that worked, Bryce. I would break them apart and bring them into my toolbox. That became my style. I would find things that did not work, and I did not like them, and I didn't believe they belonged there. Cast those aside, and pretty soon you develop a pretty good core of tools, and you become a good official. And that's how I started. And ultimately, I took over the Wrestling Officials Association and changed it to the Southern Minnesota Wrestling Officials Association. We expanded from 6 referees to right now today 65 referees, and we cover from the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area south to Iowa, over to Wisconsin, and over to South Dakota. We cover a large area of southern Minnesota, and we've got some great officials, and we really strengthen our officials through communication. Something could happen in a small town on a Tuesday night, and I will guarantee you, Bryce, that by 10 o'clock the next day, I will have that communicated around to the officials around the state. This is a situation that could occur, and here's how we like you to call it. And most importantly, here's why. not just this is what you're going to do, but here's why. And it would foster discussion. And that's the best way to learn. And everything is broken down, built back up again. And this is our policy. Yeah. And it's worked very, very well. And it's fun. I really enjoy it.
I really like that why. You're probably familiar, but Simon Sinek, he talks about always start with why. Kind of like when you're building a business or anything, right? Honestly, like if you know why you're doing something, it's way easier to do it and remain steadfast in what you're doing, right? If you understand the purpose.
That's it. Yeah. Walt Disney told us a long time ago, if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to take you
there. I haven't heard that one. How many associations are in Minnesota then? Do you know?
We got 5 associations. So
that's manageable.
It is. And through my course, I worked under a lot of people for a long time. And 2 years ago, I was anointed the position of coordinator of officials for Minnesota. So I'm the rules coordinator in Minnesota. I had some great people ahead of me. And oh, by the way, they're on speed dial.
Yeah.
They need anything, I know where to find them. And they were just super, super mentors and trainers and friends that I had a lot of respect in. I have now taken over that position, but the thing that I strongly push is communication, Bryce.
Yeah.
And that's why I just love what you're doing right here. I mean, you're communicating some things out into the wrestling world that normally we would never hear. We'd never get some of these stories, and they're fantastic. And I think we can all benefit from them. Same thing with officiating. Just something that, again, could happen at Tuesday evening in some town in Minnesota. By 10 o'clock the next day, I will have it communicated, and we're all going to learn from it. So when I became the coordinator of officials in Minnesota, I built the staff underneath me, and it's one person from each one of the associations. So all 5 associations are represented.
That's where I was kind of driving at. Sorry to cut you off there, but obviously I'm newer on the scene. I've been involved in wrestling pretty much just, like you said, 3rd grade. I didn't do it to get out of milking cows. It was kind of, you're going to wrestle in my family. You're vertically challenged, and your dad wrestled. So that's what you're going to do. But it's just funny how everyone kind of has the associations, right? And then you said, well, then I brought a person in because representation, and I've been mulling it over with some friends of mine that are officials. Just like, how could we maybe do it better to communicate now that the world's used to doing meetings on Zoom? There's nothing that can replace being in a room with people and camaraderie and all of those things. But I wonder how we could maybe get communication between associations and assignments and things and cross over, rather than, hey, you just occupy this part of the state, leave me alone. You know what I mean? Because when you have such a shortage of officials like we do in Ohio, like, you're going to have to, people are going to have to travel. We're going to have to figure it out. And I don't know what I don't know yet, but it's interesting to hear your structure and your setup there. So thanks. Is Bill Olson in your association?
Bill Olson he's my brother now, not bloodline or anything.
Yeah.
I met Bill at yes, he is. He's in my association, and he's our money man, and he pretty much runs the association when I'm doing other things. And when I was at Hayfield High School, Bill was at Leroy Ostrander, and he was a year ahead of me, and we met at a Mankato State wrestling camp in the summer, and we've been friends ever since.
Really? That's awesome.
He's just a great guy. Matter of fact, when Bill's first child was married, I officiated the wedding, and it was the first wedding I ever officiated. And we're quite close.
Yeah, so it's Reverend Rick Root.
You left the Ravishing out.
The Ravishing Reverend Rick Root. Yes. That's what we were laughing about before we got on. I'm glad we could work that into the show. I tell you what.
Good job with that.
Yeah, I've done 18 of these. He was a blast to have on the show, and it's just so cool, because how I got to meet you was through another official too. I think you might have officiated his wedding too, right?
I did, yeah.
Oh, let's see. So Laren Michael, right? So
Laren.
And I don't know.
Laren and the lovely Kimberly.
Yes, and Laren is awesome. Laren's the one that taught me this time and trained me to get my license. Haven't done my mechanics yet. So, but I put a thing out on Facebook, and I was like, hey, I want to interview an official from every state. in the next 340 days because it was 25 days in. Because I like to set crazy goals. And I got like 27 texts that night alone. And like 15 of them were from Larry. He's like, you got to talk to this, you got to talk to Rick, you got to talk to Bill. And I'm like, that's great. I want to, but what am I supposed to do, to put a smoke signal up? I was like, Larry, make an introduction. And here we are. So it's just so cool, the wrestling brotherhood and the officiating brotherhood and how that made this happen. So what else is going on in Minnesota that you're excited about this year? And we might have a semi-normal year. What's some things to be excited about?
Well, I think, Bryce, those are the key words. When we were on our national call, Rules and Turp call this summer, the big thing was, guys, we're going to get back to a normal season. We're going to have a normal season. We're going to give everybody wrestling back. So our changes this year are not significant. We added the 5-minute head, neck, and cervical injury timeout. But again, many states, Minnesota, one of them, has tried that 2 years ago to have it as a standalone injury timeout. It's important, and it's about time that we in the wrestling world have focused on head, neck, and cervical injuries, concussions.
Let's dive into that, though. Can you explain it in a little more depth? Because if that's something new, one of the things to do before the season is to get to know your rules.
Yeah, absolutely. So the head, neck, and cervical is an injury timeout that originated in Wisconsin. Wisconsin had been doing it for many years, and finally the National Federation said this is the right thing to do for us to focus on it. So what is going to occur is in a wrestling match, something happens and wrestler A is injured. He or she goes down. The referee stops the match, starts the injury time, brings the certified healthcare professional over.
I just got to pause, stay where you're at. But I love how it sounds like you are literally writing something in the casebook. Wrestler A, healthcare certified healthcare professional. Because I've been reading my casebook, so this is great. Go ahead.
Oh, it's actually easy to read, Bryce, because it's tattooed on my eyelid.
Okay.
This comes from Mr. Vreeland too, by the way. He's very good at this. So the official stops the match, brings the appropriate healthcare professional out, and key point here is the appropriate healthcare professional is appointed by the site as the healthcare person for that wrestling event. Dual, tri, quad, tournament, that person is the medical person. So nobody is coming down from the stand saying, oh, by the way, I'm a doctor, I can handle this. It is that person that makes the call that I need more time to check this wrestler out for potential concussion, for areas of head, neck, and cervical injury. So the referee literally is getting the advice from the appropriate healthcare professional. We're starting the head, neck, and cervical injury timeout. That's the signal we give to the head table. And important to note that at that time, the injury time that we had started stops and is replenished, given back. The time that was used stopped and restored, given back. We now start 5 minutes of full head, neck, and cervical injury timeout and review. You can only call it once per match. If it happens a second time, the wrestler's done appropriately so. They need attention.
Yeah.
And again, it can only be called by the appropriate healthcare professional.
And they override anyone, correct?
And as it should be.
Yes.
I can tell you about industrial solid waste, and you can tell me about a number of things from your world, and so can Bill and everybody else from their side of the world. Head, neck, and cervical requires a medical professional. And we're going to give them 5-minute timeout in wrestling to review it. And they're not going to make any solid,
they're not doing an MRI.
However, but they're going to say, I need time with this wrestler. And that's what we're going to let them go. Now, with that, if there's no appropriate healthcare professional assigned to that event, the referee is going to err on the side of safety. And if that wrestler's stumbling, if there's some instability, we're going to call the match. And that wrestler's going to be taken aside. And we will only have our 1.5 minutes, 2 injury timeouts, 1.5 minutes total to use for that assessment. So the head, neck, and cervical stands on its own. 5-minute injury timeout can only be called by the appropriate healthcare professional, can only be used once in a match.
Thank you for diving into that. I think it's really important that, who knows how many coaches actually read the rule book. We all know that we think, and I'm a coach too, so I can say this, we all know that we think we know the rules. But I'll tell you what, I learned a lot of things that I thought were rules that I'm like, oh, I probably sounded like a real idiot for the last few years. um, like the whole one, he's got to have his knee down when you're mat return. Well, no, you just have to return him under your care,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and so that's interesting. Anytime there's a opportunity, I'll call it, to learn, hopefully coaches watch the show as well, and now they can check that box there.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
what else in
So
Minnesota?
that's the main new rule. Other is that we always had the option of wearing socks during the weigh-ins, and there was this thing that came out that they've got to be low-cut socks. And now you can wear any size sock you want. There's no issue with that for the weigh-in. Once you have them on, you can't take them off, and if you didn't have them on, you can't
Can't
put
put
them
them
on.
on. Yeah.
So, and that's just kind of a cleanup rule. But those are the two main changes. So we're still weighing in shoulder to shoulder with a weigh-in uniform, full coverage for both men and women wrestlers. And if any skin checks are going to be taken care of, with the uniform on in Minnesota. If
And
they
by
do
the
it
way,
differently,
that uniform change is awesome, because what it does is that it makes it so much easier, on officials, on coaches, and everything, for athletes, for teams that have a young lady on their team as well.
absolutely.
And then
Yeah.
also with weight cutting and things, if you can't make weight in your singlet, then you're probably doing something you shouldn't be doing, even though there's
Right.
rules in place. But I got to say, hats off to the Ohio Athletic Committee. And I'm a little biased. My cousin and my father work there, but they've been doing this for almost 10 years, because they've had young girls and boys, so they're in their full uniform. And then even then, that's when people started coming up with, they call them weigh-in singlets. Have you heard of these things?
Yeah. Yeah.
Ridiculous, for like 0.3 of a pound. It's just, if there's money to be made, people will make it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it was just a matter of time. It was coming.
So outside of the rules and stuff, what are some big tournaments you got going on this year, or ones that you do annually that you always look forward to?
Well, the big one is the Clash in Minnesota, and we're very fortunate to have someone like Bill Olson coordinating the officials on that front, and Bill brings in some fantastic officials from around the nation, and when we get all of those heads in the same room, the vigor, the knowledge that comes out of that is just fantastic, as well as the different teams that come in. And I don't know how many states are covered in that this year. I mean, we've had, over 20 different states have teams in there. Some fantastic wrestling. And I will say, once you come out of the Clash, after a weekend of officiating the Clash, your next couple matches seem quite simple. Just every single match you do could be a state championship match. These kids coming in are so good, and they're so well coached, and it's such a well-run tournament. And again, from the official standpoint, we get a chance to sit down in a room, and I have a gathering I do with all of the officials and their wives, if they bring their wives, and we have a dinner, and we just talk about the different rules. And we're in Minnesota, so we're going to follow Minnesota rules, and here's how we do it. And then I'll get a chance to hear how they do it in other states in certain situations. For example, in Minnesota, toes are supporting points. So if there's 2 supporting points and there are 2 toes, it could be mine and yours. That's 2 supporting points. Wrestling continues. You wrestle in Minnesota until you're off the mat. You wrestle off the mat. And officials don't catch wrestlers going off the mat. We have safety mats in place. So we're in position to score those points that are, quite frankly, missed too many times right on the sideline. And we're looking for 2 supporting points in bounds. And when there's not, then we stop it and bring them back. In a pinning situation, you can have 2 toes in and every other wrestler and every other part of the wrestler out, and we're calling near fall. As long as they're still on the mat, we're calling near fall, and you can secure a fall. in that case with just toes in. So we talk about those things and those differences. And it was kind of funny because I'd mentioned Punahou earlier in this discussion. Punahou is a good school in Hawaii, a fantastic school. And it's a private school. And they brought up a couple teams. They were just fantastic athletes, fantastic people. We got them on snowmobiles for the weekend, and they got a chance to race through the snow, and saw them outside in their skivvies catching snow in their mouth. They'd never seen snow in Hawaii, thank God. But they came up and the coach said, you guys call a loss of control different than we've ever seen it. I mean, we have to have complete separation, turning face to face, and then maybe for the rest feeling good, we're going to get one out of it. We'll do a loss of control if, in fact, control is no longer held. We'll do a loss of control and put them in a neutral and signal it. You'll see many times the official will just go up and signal, said, lost control. We're neutral now. And I think that's a good call. And I think it took a little bit of interpretation of the rules to get us to that point. But we see a lot of states do it the exact same way. And, I know Punahou noted at the clash that everybody called it that way and everybody was consistent. And Bryce, these are officials from 20 different states that all called it the same way. That's a tribute to the National Federation and how they roll it out. Guys like Jim Vreeland, myself in Minnesota and other areas where we just communicate those changes. And in wrestling, control is felt, not observed. And many times you have no idea how the ref is calling control, and from the stands, it just doesn't make any sense. But as a wrestler and having been down there on that mat, wrestler A is in control, and why. Again, it's felt, not observed.
And it sounds like it's more of a college style with those two rules in particular.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it bridges these good high school wrestlers into college. Yeah.
And that probably explains part of the reason why Minnesota is just so tough and putting out All-Americans all the time in college. No, I'm serious, because I really do believe, and I got away from it because actually someone told me you talk about this on every show, so I stopped talking about it. But I do believe, 4 years of wrestling, and if you're doing it and you're invested, right, you're not just doing it to hang out with your buddies or whatever. And I'm not saying you're a world beater, but if you plan on going into college and you wrestle, I'm just going to use Ohio, and you can't get out on bottom, you can't, because you just don't get to wrestle down there, because we call stalling on top. So you know what I mean? It's just It's not conducive. So then you go, and I'm telling you, watch some of these kids that have come out of Ohio that are like 4-time state champs, high recruits, and then watch them struggle their first year in college, their second year in college. And it has to be that. I mean, what else could it be? So I really believe the officiating, and I'm not placing blame, but I believe that the officiating in those formative years is really important, because it's just like, if you've never wrestled freestyle and you just switch from folk style to freestyle, good luck. That's easier than Greco.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and Bryce, you're spot on. I mean, we are all a matter of our experiences. And if you experience 4 or 5 years of high school wrestling at a certain way, and then all of a sudden you break into college and it's different, you have not experienced some of the things that you need to come into the program with.
Yeah.
And I think we are fortunate in some areas. And I think, you did touch on it. Minnesota has had some good young wrestlers come out of here, but I attribute it to the rules and the application of the rules a little bit closer to college, but also just constant wrestling. We have a group here called the NYWA. It's the Northern Youth Wrestling Association, and these are kids from 5 years old up to 6th grade. And in the state, we probably have 3,000 kids that are in this program. My association has dedicated all of our officials, and these are going to be officials that last week they reffed the state finals, and this week they're going to be reffing the NYWA tournament. They may be down on their knees with some of these kids, but they're reffing that tournament. These kids get the best experienced officials reffing their matches. Now, Bryce, this is important because we've done this for 15 years now in Minnesota. The NYWA it's fantastic. We have brought out the Bergies that went on to Penn State. We brought out Patrick Kennedy, the Carlson boys out of Wilmer. these were 6th grade outstanding wrestler of the year. The very next year as a 7th grader. And in Minnesota, you can wrestle on varsity as a 7th grader. They're breaking through into the quarterfinals of the individual because they are that good.
Yeah.
And Mark Hall.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we brought some great kids, but they come through this little kids program, and they're fired up. They just simply know the rules, and we don't see a lot of problems in high school because they know, one, you just don't talk back to the referee. Your coach doesn't talk back to the referee. We're on the same keel, if you will. We're on the same level. We're on the same platform. We know that I'm going to make the call. It may not be popular, but this is the way it's going to be. And we communicate, you know, so we talk all the way through, and these kids are ready. They're ready. And when they get into high school, they're good. And when they get through high school and they move on to college, they succeed. And it's expectations.
Youth wrestling is really important, but what you said, those events, and with the good officials, is we've seen Ohio wrestling grow leaps and bounds. So we have something similar, that Ohio Athletic Committee that I mentioned. So they have a grade school state. So I think that's 12 and under, right? So there's age divisions. Then you have junior high state. That's been going on like 27 years now. But I mean, you've got some of the, like you said, some of the people that come through that, they see the process. Even at the tournament I'm referencing, there's a tunnel just like the one in high school that you're going to come out of. For the Parade of Champions, there's a smoke machine and the lights are out and there's strobe lights, and they do this video and like this, just like the state tournament. So if you start when you're in 5th grade, you could have done this, you know, X amount of years. So then when you get there as a freshman, it's like, done this before, you know,
the shock and awe is no longer there.
Yeah.
Experienced it.
And they know how to interact with officials, and they know what it's like to be on that stage. And what that does is, like you said, wrestling is about positioning. You got to be put in positions and get used to those and learn how to act and react. And it's no different mentally too, right? Like if you're not mentally prepared for the situation you're going into, it doesn't matter how athletic you are. I've seen some of the best athletes, you know, that just can't get their head straight or manage anxiety or stress. And I think you need both sides. So it's really cool to hear that you guys are doing that. And it makes a lot of sense with those names that you mentioned.
And it's fun, but you know, it allows me to really promote officiating. And I put an ad in every one of the local NYWA newspapers and flyers that we're looking for officials. And there'd be some dads that, you know, I mean, these are established people. They've had a job in the house, mortgage, and they're there. And now they say, gosh, you know, maybe I should try officiating. And we've pulled some great people in. It's helping me bring our numbers in. Our new officials in Minnesota. And by the way, I'm going to just take a little segue into promoting officiating.
So that's where I wanted to go next anyhow.
This is working out, Bryce.
Yeah.
We bring in, you know, one of our top officials, and he does a Zoom meeting like this with all new officials, gets them all set on the exact same plane. And when he's done with 2 very in-depth sessions, and this is how you register, how you use the online tools, how you work with the state tools, how you fill out evaluations, as to where you stand on the mat, where you're positioning, all of it. And when they're done with this program, then they go to their associations, and the associations do the actual mentoring level 2 next. And it's really working. We're getting good numbers. We got over 20 new officials in Minnesota in wrestling this year. And I'm really excited about that. And you know, the secret is really the retention. You know, how do we hang on to these guys? And I think getting them partnered up with a good senior official and getting them out on the mat is how we hang on to them.
Yeah, I agree. It's just like when you're starting out wrestling, I always tell the kids, I'm like, if you got a buddy, bring them to practice, because wrestling's tough, and it's a lot more fun when you've got a buddy that you can maybe beat up on or just say hey to during the water break, right?
Absolutely. So anybody can wrestle. Anybody can wrestle. You know?
Yeah, I had that conversation yesterday, and that's what's so great about it. Any body shape, any type, doesn't matter. It's a sport for everyone. We're changed. Think of how the weights have changed and everything to make it even more inclusive this year with changing of the weights too. It's helpful.
It is. And, I know in my 42 years of doing this, and it certainly, it's just flown by, but it's very clear to me that any anybody can wrestle. And you got to have the head. You've got to have the thoughts. You've got to have the heart. But the best match I have ever worked in all of my years, hands down, without any hesitation, Bryce, is a young man named Justin Turek. Never knew Justin, had no idea who he was, and I just drew him at the state finals, and we have quite a rotation, so you don't know which referee is going to be on which match, and I drew Justin Turek, and Justin was a unique kid. He had a birth defect, and he only had one arm, and I had no idea how he made the finals. I had no idea how he made the state tournament until I saw him wrestle, and he was so amazing. And he beat this Dvorak kid from Scott West 4-3, a heck of a match. I don't know how many years ago this was. This was a long time ago. I was so impressed to raise his hand as a state champion. And honestly, and this is emotional. I had tears running down my face when I was raising his hand. It was this is so fantastic that a physically disabled young man could accomplish this, and for the rest of his life, he's got a label that goes on the other labels that are unfairly given to him. But he's got a label. He's a state champion, and he was just amazing. It was just an amazing match, and it really hit me a little bit more because my son is paralyzed. He's a paraplegic, and a stupid mistake the night he was born paralyzed him. But and I pressed it. He was a fantastic athlete himself. He plays sled hockey. If you've ever seen sled hockey, they sit on the ice and push themselves with sticks and shoot with both hands. And he became very good and won a national tournament. And but when I saw Justin come out in that mat, that's the real neat thing about wrestling. Anybody can do it. Anybody can do it if you want to.
It's so awesome when those moments happen. And they don't happen every year. It's few and far between, but I've been at the state tournament a couple of times when some really cool stuff has happened similar to that. Last year, because it was COVID, we got to have a state tournament, but we have 3 divisions. They did them in different places. And I've mentioned this, first ever female to place at state in the all boys. That was cool. In Division 2, first person to ever win a match that was born blind at state. His first match, though, he drew Patty Gallagher, who was like the #1 pound for pound recruit out of St. Edwards that's going to Ohio State. So he had to wrestle in first round. That didn't go well. And then he bounces back, and wins his next match. So it's those stories are the things that just completely validate what you said. If there's a will, it's a way. And, we saw that with Anthony Robles how many years ago?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I remember this had to be back in like 1996. I kind of still remember it was at Parma, and there was a young man had no legs and he was wrestling, right? And I'm like, man, this gotta be really, really rough. Like how, rough. And then 20 something years later, you see that and you're like, holy cats. Like,
it pulls us out of the positions that we hold, and we just get all the way back to the ground. Think, wow, this is special. This is really special.
And then, I mean, in a different way too, we got to witness it this last year, just with how amazing and this is different, but I mean, just those moments that make you proud to be a part of the sport. When I saw our women's team with only 4 Olympiads, we've only been around, and medal like that, I'm like, holy cow. Like my niece, is going to grow up in a world where, maybe she doesn't want to wrestle, but at least she could if she wants.
Could if she wanted to.
And that's the way it should be. Man, thank you for sharing that story. That's good stuff.
Oh, thank you. It's a story that needs to be told more, and we need to share this kind of stuff. That wrestling's not just swelling the ears and getting out there with a thick neck and getting at it. There's some incredible success stories that make us all better people.
And life lessons. I mean, you said it right off the rip, man. That you learned from that loss, and then for the rest, as you went into computer science, then into law, into officiating, you started breaking down things and piecing them back together. And I would imagine, all the speaking that you've done in your job at IBM and with your job now, and maybe with, when during law school. I would imagine that makes you a better communicator with coaches too when they call you to the table.
Well, I think it does. And that's an art in itself. There's high emotions, and you've experienced that in your officiating career and in what you do. And I think what I try to follow is just a kind of an Iraq rule. What is the issue? Know the issue. And to know the issue as an official, you have to just simply listen. Let the coach talk. What is the concern? And then after the issue is known, state the rule, the holding after that. What did you hold? Why did I do this? Here was the issue. Here's the rule. Here's how I applied it. And then summarize it and then stand back. But we as officials don't have to talk. We have to listen and let the coach explain the situation. And sometimes it's a full circle and you never said a word. And the coach leaves and we resume wrestling. And they're just something that needed to get out. And it's part of the communication I talked about earlier. It's one of the strongest parts of this world, I believe. We just have to listen.
Yeah, and with that, something that came out of a call I got to do earlier this week for an upcoming show was the retention that you mentioned before. And most of the time when people quit, it's just because they're getting sick of being berated, right? For giving up, X amount of time to drive to and from events and then go in the gym and all that other stuff. And one of the things that she made me, Kim Hernandez, made me think about is, one, have I ever pushed an official out because of how I acted? That I hope the answer is no. And I don't think I ever have. If I have, then they probably needed to go anyhow, because I'm not that vocal. But it also made me think, well, if I know an official at an event, maybe I should ask, hey, who are the new officials? So that way, if there's knowing that there might be some calls that are a little bit questionable, but if I do need to call someone to the table, just know, hey, this person's learning. Is it junior high? There's no scholarships being given out, and I want you to be there next year. So these conversations are what I think help me draw on maybe when I'm losing, I'm getting ready to lose it, right? Just be like, okay, hold on, dude. Because now, especially, how would that look? I'm talking with officials on a podcast. I lose my mind in the corner of a junior high match. Good way to get canceled.
Well, we talked earlier about, I mentioned earlier about how I believe everything is cyclical, and in wrestling specifically, and some of the best officials that have worked with me and for me and myself included have been mentored by some incredible coaches. And coaches have a very keen eye on what they look for in officials. And we sort through some of the stuff we get back from them. However, the better officials listen to coaches, listen to what they have to say. And the better the coaching, the better the officiating. The better the officiating, the better the wrestling. The better the wrestling, the better the coaching. It's a cycle. We're all in this together. And I'll send a new guy out to a school, and I'll send him out with I know there's a senior coach there, and I'll get a hold of the coach early and say, pull him off to the side, grab a cup of coffee and sit down and chat. Let him know what you saw and what you like. Tell him what you like, and tell him areas that you think he should work on. And then have him get back with me or with some of our mentors, officials, and we'll work on those things. We'll make them better. We'll break those pieces apart. We'll fix them. We'll put it all back together, and it'll be a much better machine. And it works.
That's awesome. Well, hopefully people that are listening can try that approach too. I think the theme for most of our conversation today is communication, man. And I liked your point about just listening, because really when someone's angry, sometimes most of the time they just want catharsis. They just want to be heard and know that they're heard. Acknowledge it. Because like you said, you can listen and you don't have to say anything. And you can listen to feedback too. And they can be like, well, I think you should have done this. You don't have to change anything.
No.
But by listening, you've kind of placated them a little bit. Wow. Hey, man, so fun. This is awesome. It's always great to spend an hour talking wrestling. I want to catch up with you offline. So stick around. You still got some time?
Will do. Yes.
Yeah.
Bryce, thank you. I love what you do, and getting the different stories out, on wrestling and the wrestling base. And we certainly cover a lot of things other than wrestling in life, but it all comes back to wrestling. And these are stories that need to be heard. And thank you for communicating them.
No, thanks for giving me the opportunity to tell your story. I'm looking forward to telling a whole bunch more. So stay tuned. All right. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.